Hi, and welcome to Dockside with Deb. In this weekly show, we'll talk to people who are doing some pretty cool things in sailing and experts in their field. I'm Deborah Diel, sailor, founder of MySail, and your host for today. Dockside with Deb is recorded live, so you can join in and ask your own questions. To find out more, head to mysail.team/Dockside with Deb. Let's get started. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us tonight for Dockside with Deb. Tonight, I'm really excited to have Julie Hodder with us. She's a passionate, lifelong ocean sailor, navigator, and the previous Commodore at Middle Harbour Yacht Club in Sydney. I'm going to pass it straight over to Julie to let us know a little bit about your sailing background and how you got started in sailing.
My favourite story is that I started sailing when I was a baby, and I have a picture, so I've got to show the picture. So look, this is me sailing in. This is me actually sailing in England with my mother and father. So I started before I was about 6 months old, Wow. But I actually didn't do much sailing then. I don't think I was even holding on to anything. But I came to Australia when I was 3, and we went and lived in Wauchope for 10 years, which is a small country town near Port Macquarie. We were into all sorts of water sports there, and we actually had a catamaran. So this is Dad with my brother, sister and I on the catamaran on the river. So that was our first start. But then as a teenager, I actually moved to Newcastle. This is where we started yacht racing. And Dad actually bought his first Endeavour yacht. And this was the Endeavour 24. Then we actually migrated to an Endeavour 26. We all had to go sailing with the family, but I really wanted to go surfing because I was a surfy chick. So Dad actually threw me an old wooden heron with another girl. It was all female crew, actually the only females in the racing. Wasn't a particularly good boat, and our favourite activity was actually capsizing in the middle of the 16-foot skiff fleet and wave to the boys. So we had great fond memories of there. The CHS Championships used to be there, and I sailed many herons in that, and also Dad's yacht. But then I went on at Lake Macquarie. I got more and more interested, went on sailing Stars, Adams 10s, and when I went to university, I ended up sailing with another girl in Botany Bay on Cherubs in Sydney. So, but my passion started with my dad on the Endeavour 24, and so I suppose it's really got into it as a family from quite a young age.
Wow, and those are amazing photos. And I would have been pretty impressed if you said you were actually holding things and sailing when you were 6 months old. So I think that's a really kind of great way to get started. And so, you know, those are a lot of your kind of younger days in the dinghy and the smaller boats. But, you know, then you've gone on to do a lot of kind of ocean racing and navigation. How did you get into the ocean racing side of things?
Well, Dad had Endeavour 24 and Endeavour 26, and in those days the joggies were really big, and Lake Macquarie Yacht Club had a joggie fleet. We used to have to go out through the underneath the bridge there, so tipped on our sides. But we went racing there, and that's really started racing with my dad. And as soon as he took me offshore, I took a passion to offshore racing. As you know, I don't really like inshore racing very much, except for on Wednesdays, except for today. So I really started navigating, I suppose, because I've always been mathematically inclined, and I just love solving problems. So Dad's noticed that. But then I came down to Sydney and just on my last year of university, joined another jog boat. It was Outlaw with Ian Thomas. I don't know if you know Ian Thomas. He's the one that actually helped Kay Coddy put the boat together for her epic voyage. It was great, but they didn't have a navigator, so they threw me into the navigation, and I sort of self-taught myself there. We weren't very sophisticated. We just went round the buoys. But then I went from sailing there to Diamond Cutter. Now, Diamond Cutter was one of the best blue water boats in the CYC fleet. We had a full-time, we had a navigator, but he was from Melbourne. So he only came up for the major races in the beginning. So in the Blue Water series, I started doing more and more navigation, which was great. We won quite a few races, mainly because, well, some of the races because I could read the sailing instructions, which I'll tell you about afterwards. But I really thought when I started navigating that was a great way to stay dry. And I really hate sitting on that rail for hours on end. So it's a very good excuse to go downstairs and,
Yeah, that's a good one.
get out of the wet, especially. So I don't get seasick. So yeah, I don't like cooking all that much, but I cook when it's rough weather, so I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah, that's an interesting point about the seasickness, because if you're offshore and you're navigating, then you know, it's not necessarily the best place to be. But for people who don't, then like you said, it's a nice place to kind of stay warm and dry and have a good excuse to be to say, gotta go, gotta go. Check.
Yeah, I just don't get seasick, so you know, probably pretty lucky.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you learned a lot just by kind of getting thrown in the deep end, a bit with your family and a bit by doing it and a bit by kind of getting thrown in. Did you have anyone who kind of, you know, provided you some mentorship or guidance to help you learn, or did you do any kind of courses or anything more structured, I guess, to learn about navigation?
Well, when I first started navigating, of course, we didn't have any computers or sat navs or GPSs or any fancy equipment. We just had a piece of paper and, you know, what do you call them, dividers and hand bearing compasses, etc. So I really read in the beginning. I read a few books and just taught myself to navigate. But I thought, well, if I'm going to be a navigator, I need to be trained. And so I did my coastal navigation course, and then went on to do the celestial navigation course, which I got 99.8% in, because I made a mistake right at the last minute. But yeah, so I did have some formal training. On my first two trips on Diamond Cutter to Hobart, we actually didn't have any, you know, those fancy equipment or etc. So we actually had to navigate basically by DRing and using a radio directional finder, which is like a radio. Do you know what a radio directional finder is?
I don't actually know.
It's like a radio, and it's got a rod on the top. Yeah. And you have to move it around, and you tune into the frequency when it's the loudest, and so you know where that station is on land. So you need to get two stations, because you could only get a 2-point fix, you couldn't get a 3-point fix. So yeah, so we first two times was using that.
And you mentioned DRing. I guess you mean dead reckoning. Can you explain that as well for any of our audience who don't know dead reckoning?
Yeah, so well, you really have to keep awake all the time, because when you're DRing, it means that you have to keep track of what direction you're going in and how fast the boat is. So you sort of have to do the averages over and roughly work out where you were. So it's not that accurate. So we combined it with a 2-point fix. It was, you know, it wasn't too bad. We got there. We certainly liked it when we saw lighthouses. Yeah. And we got close to the coast. So so that was really good, but we couldn't really celestial navigate. In fact, I've never really had to celestial navigate. We used to practice on Commodore going to the UK when we were just delivering it, but we actually had a GPS then, so actually it was a sat nav before the GPS, but never really had to celestial navigate. So
do you think that, just talking about the celestial navigation, do you think that's a good skill for people to learn nowadays? You know, is there kind of times where you think that might be applicable if all of your other systems are down, or would you be looking at other things like you said, dead reckoning, to kind of be your backup?
I think that if you take up celestial navigating, you'd mainly do it out of an interest now, and mainly cruising, because you really don't have enough time to take the sights and get all the calculations. Because I remember we used to have to use tables, and then my girlfriend Susie's father was in the Navy, and he gave me a calculator, and you'd put in all the angles and it'd work out automatically for you. So that was my first instrument. Been rather a gadget person myself. So yeah, it's probably I'd definitely do a coastal navigation course, because you really need to learn the basics. But well, yeah, celestial would be only if you're really interested. So, but from then on, I went on and to different boats and navigation. I was very lucky to get on a lot of really good boats. Won a lot of races. It's taken me all around the world. So, but when the gadgets start coming in was when I first started owning boats, and we had Morning Mist, which is a FAR 50, and the Magnavox, which is a Volvo 60, but that's when I first started getting the computer and working out all the courses, etc., the hardware. So I've never been interested in steering or even really trimming. So I love playing with gadgets. I always get the latest gadgets. My husband gives me a new gadget every birthday. He gets my old iPhone, I get the new iPhone. So
gadgets, what kind of tools and systems do you use to navigate nowadays if you're going offshore?
Right. So nowadays, navigation sort of changed. It's more about tactics than where you're going. So I've used different software systems, but now I use Expedition, which was produced by Nick White in New Zealand. He's a navigator himself, done all sorts of things around the world. Great guy. Now, Expedition is on the computer, and I'll be showing you a few pictures later on. But it integrates, it's a software, but it integrates with lots of other things. So you have to buy the charts separately, and then you integrate with weather systems. Some of them are free, and you get the weather grid files and tide grid files. But some of them you have to pay, you know, like PredictWind, Tide Tech. So what it does is it uses the charts. You can download the weather over the charts. You can bring all the instruments information from whatever instruments, is a whole range of instruments you can get there. And you can plot your course. And from there, if you put the polars in, you can actually get your optimal courses. So it can be quite fiddly to set up in the beginning, but once you've got the system set up, it's actually quite easy to use. When you want to get into more sophisticated things, it can be quite complex, but for the basics, it's quite easy. But you can download AIS and YS tracking. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what they use in the YB tracking, I mean, in the Hobart race. You can download the positions from there, and you can see positions of other boats on there too. So that's what I basically use, but I also use, right, so after I plot all the courses in Expedition, I actually download it, and that just takes like a fraction of a second, into my handheld. Okay. Right, so that's exactly the same. I don't go anywhere without this handheld, and it's really saved my life. So it
actually see it
basically
the virtual
tucks into the girl's pocket. Okay. So that's where it lives my whole for the whole race time. But it's really great. I know people find it a bit old-fashioned, but it's I find it really great, especially for emergencies. So we had an emergency on about time. We had a man fall overboard. I had the iPad, which I use to interface with Expedition downstairs. Trouble is with the iPad upstairs, it's very hard to see, and it's also hard in an emergency to, like, because you need two hands to click it on and then press the Man Overboard button, find it. And if you're wet, it's even impossible. But with my little handheld, so I could just, I was on my side and pull the pulled the GPS out of my pocket and just hit the one button, and I've got his exact position. So this is what it looked like.
And I think we have one of your crew members from About Time On who just commented, thank goodness that you do keep that on you.
Yeah.
That's interesting, actually. Kind of talk us through, for people who aren't familiar kind of with the Man Overboard button and that function, talk us through what that does and maybe, you know, that situation, how you were able to kind of, I know you guys got back really quickly, how you're able to.
Well, you've got a Man Overboard button. It actually connects to the expedition. It's generally held near the entrance of the boat, but you know, people are flying around everywhere, don't press it. So I press it on my handheld and just transfer it to the expedition. But also we had the AIS MOB things, and what that does, the expedition picks up all those AIS signals, and so we could see that person drifting along. And so all you have to do in expedition is click on that, right click on it and say go to that position. So yeah, it's really very handy. It's different from the personal EPIRBs because the personal EPIRBs go up to the satellites, whereas the AIS MOBs, you can pick them up from the computer. In fact, alarms go off everywhere, not only on your boat, but other boats as well. So we stopped a lot of other boats.
Yeah, nice. So you're able then track back. And when you press the Man Overboard button, that takes the position of where that button was pressed. But I guess if the person is then moving because of the currents, that's where your, you know, personal AIS, as you mentioned, will kind of come in.
So it fires about every 3 minutes or 5 minutes, the new position, so we could actually see him moving. Actually, we never lost sight of him, but we definitely had him tracked on the expedition. Yeah.
Nice.
I wouldn't go to sea without one now.
Yeah, it's a really good piece of, especially on, I know that situation was a flatter, you know, that it wasn't super big swell, but, or, you know, if it was, then that would be a different situation, being able to kind of keep sight of somebody as well. So
yeah. So and the other time, this is probably about time as well, Jackie's probably laughing about this, but we blew up our engine halfway across Bass Strait, which means that I couldn't use the computer. Now, if you can't use the computer, you also can't recharge iPads or iPhones or anything as well. So, but with my trusty little handheld, all you have to do is change the batteries once a day. And so it was easier to find out where we only needed to know where we were going or where we were and where we had to go. But we couldn't use all the fancy instruments. So they're the basic systems that I use, the computer and my handheld.
Yeah, nice. And if we kind of, you mentioned earlier that, you know, navigating now is different. It's not about knowing where you are, it's about the tactics. Can you kind of explain a little bit what you mean by that?
Well, in the olden days, it's like the navigator, I can remember saying, is they'd say, oh, where are we? That's all they wanted to know, where we are and what direction do we have to go in. That's all. Whereas now we can plot courses and tell them what the next leg true wind direction or true wind angle is and apparent wind speed. So you can choose the sails, and if you've got the sail polars in, then you can actually, the system will tell you what sail to use. But there's a lot more tactics involved. There's all the performance data comes in, so I can actually track how good the steerers are, or which crew, the A or the B crew, is the fastest team, because it tells us the polar percentages. So it's a lot more complex now.
Yeah, nice. And look, if you were somebody who, or when you're, say, preparing to kind of go on a long offshore race, what are some of the things that you do ahead of time to prepare and get ready for that?
Okay, well, the first thing, because I'm going on a new boat now, is to make sure all the systems integrate and everything's in place. so that the instruments talk to the computer, and that the internet works, and that sort of thing. And for the Hobart, the satellite phone works and does an interface with the computer. Now that takes a lot of time, but once you got on that, generally you don't have any problems. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that I plot all the courses in expedition, and whether it's a long race or a short race, I plot the courses. Now I did have a diagram here. I don't know. But I don't.
You'll open it when you click screen share. You just have to select the image so that it shows us that instead of.
Yeah, it was giving me a different image before.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was the. And can you see it now?
Yep.
Oh, good.
That's your Man Overboard.
I think I was on your computer for some reason before.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure. It's done something funny.
So I couldn't recognise anything. Anyway, so this is like the start of the Hobart. So I plotted all in expedition. I plot not only the marks that we have to go round, but I plot the other marks as well, as you can see here. And that means that you can use them, and you can draw on them, and you can discuss it with the crew, and you can show the whole crew. So this is like at the end of the Hobart. I also put where the mandatory calls are. I have these plasticized and put up on the side of the boat, and people could just use them and draw the winds in, so they get the big picture of where we're going. And this all has the direction and the distance between each one of the marks. So I do that, like, not just for short races or long races, but for short races too. Like this is the Langkawi one. Okay. And so everyone can see, they can draw where the wind's coming from and discuss it. So that's the first thing out. For Hobart, the sort of was 3 diagrams, but for something like the King's Cup, there's 41 courses, so that can take some time to do. And so I plasticize every one of those and just pull it out as I do it. I've also downloaded everything into my handheld GPS. So the other thing I do is a lot of routing. So on here, as I said before, you download the weather files, you've got your polars in there, and you've got the course from A to B. Now, what you do is you take different types of grid files. So I've got GFS and the government ones, and this is the EC one. And what I do is to model different weather conditions, and you'll see a blue line here is one, and this is a red line. This is another one. This one could be the GFS weather, and this one could be the EC, and this one could be the other one. And you can have 6 courses if you want to, or superimposed. And then you just run it in expedition, and it tells you where you should go. Now, hopefully, you're going to get those 3 lines lining up. So by the time we started Hobart, we basically had 2 lines, and this is the line that we followed down here. This is the current, as you can see here, and these are the weather bulbs. So you start doing that, maybe I do 1 3 weeks out, and then starting 2 weeks out, I might do it every couple of days, and then send it to the rest of the crew. And then the last week I do it every single day, sometimes twice a day, just to see the models, the weather models coming into alignment. That also helps the crew choose what sails and gives them some idea what the conditions are going to be like and prepare them. There's lots of discussions around these diagrams. So
people who aren't familiar with those different models, can you explain kind of why there's kind of some different options in here?
Yeah, this is the EC, or EC is the European one. It's free, and so is the GFS. The GFS is the American one, and all information's free in America. But unfortunately, our BOM one is not free, and it's very expensive. You can get it from Roger or someone for just before Hobart if you pay for his services. Yeah, but they're just different weather models, and they're the 3 main ones that are used in Australia. it'd be really good if we could get the bomb ones for free. Yeah. So.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but the third thing, well, one of the other things that you should do before the race is actually read the notice of race and the sailing instructions very, very carefully. One of few races, because we've read them correctly, but also try to make sure that the skipper knows. I know that one Hobart racer was on wasn't my Volvo 60, it was another Volvo 60, and I said to the steerer, do you know where the start line is? And I was going to explain it to him. Yeah, I know. Well, he thought it was the Middle Harbour boat, not the buoy. So we broke the start, had to go back. But even just examples on our Wednesday races. This is going back here. This is the CSF that you get down here. This is all the sorts of information
okay
that you can have. Like, so just go back here. This is the sail that we use. True wind direction, true wind speed, targets. They're the sort of information that I send out to the crew. But going back to this Wednesday race, it actually says all marks should be rounded or passed to starboard. Now we have a course, and I drew this because we have a course that goes from Point Piper here, Rose Bay, Point Piper, around to Taylor's Bay. But it also says got Shark Island to starboard.
Mm-hmm. Some
people go round Shark Island, which is not actually illegal, because you can actually round it or pass it, but it's a lot quicker to pass it. So reading the sailing instructions can take some time. I highlight everything. You know, it's like penalties. Do we do a 1-term penalty or 2-term penalty? Those are the sort of things that you need to prepare for before you start any kind of racing.
Yeah, it's a good point. And I remember being on the start boat once for Sydney Hobart. And as you said, with that mark, and the boat is a bit of a gotcha. And I remember seeing some of the boats come by, and the person on bow is actually pinning the line on the boat instead of on the mark. So even if I don't know if the skipper had that information, but it obviously didn't make it to the person on the bow as well. So yeah, it's good point with that, making sure people know the sailing instructions. Pretty basic.
Yeah.
Yeah, and okay, thinking about, you know, we looked at some of those kind of weather routings, and there's different options, you know, and you're kind of looking to hopefully get those to converge. When you're actually out there on the race, things change. Sometimes you get somewhere and you're expecting it's going to be 3 knots of current and it's not, or whatever. How do you kind of make sure that you're on the best route while you're racing, and identify if you're not, and then kind of fix it? What are some of your tips around on the water navigation?
Well, you always discuss it with the tactician and the steerers and various other watch captains, etc. So we choose what we think is the route, and hopefully the weather patterns will all come in alignment then. But when I'm out on the water, I also compare our course to the optimal route. And so you can click on Now button, and it should say this is where you should be and this is where you are. So you can see the difference. So you can see whether the weather pattern is actually agreeing, or what's predicting is actually happening. So you look at that. For the 98 Hobart, for the 2019 Hobart, it was very accurate. We stuck right to our optimal courses. You saw all the currents there, so we went into the maximum current. Sorry, I just have a drink of water. And we were doing really well until we wiped out our engine, but anyway. And it was actually an interesting race. So I've sort of got that to share too, and hopefully it's going to come up with mine. I think I got your screen before.
Yeah, we've got them.
Oh, sorry, this has gone back again. So this is what happened. There was in the middle of the race, there was a trough, and the trough is an area of absolutely no wind. So it's caused by the northerly winds coming down and the southerly winds coming up. So so what you could see here is that we were exactly in the position that we wanted to be. You can also see the other boats on the AIS. Now we could only see boats that were actually in VHF distances away. So you can see that that's very useful, this AIS. This is all the information that we track as well on performance. This is just navigation on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side is all the tactical type things. But I'll just progress it through. So in the first one, we was tearing down, and then you can see in here, right in the middle, people are going in all different directions. There's a yellow boat there going north, there's one going east. We're actually going east there with the red boat. And Quest down the bottom is now starting to get out of it. It's a 3.6 knots. So this is what it looks like, and this is what we're looking at on the best. Now, when you go through these troughs, you try to go through them perpendicular. So so you go straight through, but of course, with no wind, you don't have any steerage, so it's not always easy. These ones are now taking off. You can see Maserati down here has got 12 knots. And we're now trying to get out of it by going sort of southwest with the red boat. So that was really interesting. But this diagram here is, I didn't actually take the picture of the weather bulbs. Like if you hit now, this is what the prediction. So you can see the blue arrows that are coming down from the top. That's the northerly winds, and the arrows on the bottom are the southerly winds, and you can see where everyone stopped in the middle. Now that was very accurate. So you can see that's where we were now, and that's what our weather files said. So I was pretty impressed with that.
Mm. Yeah. And how often do you kind of refresh your weather data?
Well, it depends on the internet. So I refresh it twice a day if I'm close to internet, like if you're doing coastal navigation. But we had a sat phone. Oh, well, everyone has to have a sat phone on the Hobart, but it's actually quite expensive to download them. So I was able to download weather files about once a day, and then you would run your optimal course again from the point that you're at and see how different it is from the day you started. So you might have to change your mind there because, as you know, the weather changes.
Yeah, exactly. Now, though. But I guess the interesting point you made about being able to see the other yachts, and that's actually much more accurate data about if you haven't, say, downloaded a weather file for 22 hours, you can see what they're doing, so you can kind of see what speed and direction and stuff they're heading in and kind of.
And you also get, the last 24 hours, you also get higher resolution files. Whereas if you're on a 3-day race, the second and third day you won't have the high resolution files, and the high resolution files give you a better idea. So they only come out like 24 hours beforehand. So you keep having to download them, and they're quite big files. So yeah, so you have to be careful because it's cost. But if you're on the internet, we also, going up and down the coast, we also look at the BOM weather predictions and also the observations. So you can see what's actually happening on the coast. Although you've got to be careful because not all weather stations are actually in a handy position.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, if something's a bit inland, then it may not be giving you the right kind of data. Yeah. Is that kind of what you mean?
Yep.
Kind of thinking about some of the situations that you've been in, do you have any kind of stories around a time or conditions that you experienced something that was really different to what was forecast and maybe caused a bit of a challenge, and how did you manage that?
Yes, there's a whole lot of races that with the weather forecast is just completely wrong, and Jackie can probably tell you that when we went on that Newcastle race, I go, okay, I give up, it's wrong. It was just completely wrong, and even if you downloaded files, it still wasn't giving you what we actually had. So I think then you just got to go with the seat of your pants and sort of use the AIS to have a look at what other boats, and if you're close to the shore, you can actually see all the fleet if you're on the internet. But have a look at where the other boats are going and whether they've lost any wind or whether they've got wind, and then maybe head off towards that direction. Races like the 98 Hobart, we weren't expecting that big east coast low. So we'd already gotten past Eden and had to take our sails down, and we were sailing at 5 knots without any sails on at all.
Wow.
So
tell us about the 98. I mean, what yacht were you on? Were you navigating that?
Yeah, on my yacht, Morning Mist. Unfortunately, the person who put it together drilled a hole through the fuel tank just before we left, so the whole boat was covered in diesel, and I still didn't get seasick. So we were just swimming around in diesel or sliding around in diesel. It was just everywhere, all through the sails, everywhere. But yeah, it was really big. The waves are really big. Now we just went off about 50, 60 degrees to the wind, so that we was reaching, and we just go up the wave and down the wave. I had the same problem when I sailed on Commodore in England. I used to have to steer then, but in these big storms, you got to make some of the waves don't have any back to them, so you have to be really careful. So you try to go up into the wave and then pull away on the back of the wave. So you just got to go up and down, and yeah. So, but of course, we went straight through the eye of the storm. Have all the pictures of that as well, but there was absolutely no wind in the eye of the storm. People saying, "Oh, should we sneak up a sail?" I think it lasted, I can't remember now, but a half an hour, 3/4 of an hour, and then we just got slammed out the other side. Not so bad, but we got slammed out the other side. But then, of course, you just pick up and then have to rework out your courses. So.
Yeah, thinking about, kind of navigating when you get to a situation like that. I mean, with the 98, were you prepared for that? Did you know that you were going to be getting that type of weather? Or when you did, how do you kind of think about, okay, we need to get out of this? How do you?
Well, when we started, of course, we didn't know, but we did, like a few hours out, knew that it was coming, and I rang up my husband, who was sunning himself in the pool, and I said, "Oh, we're going to hit a bit of a storm here," and he said, "Oh, okay," and I said, "We'll be okay. We've got everything's down pat." And then a few hours later, I ring him up and I said, "Oh, starting to get into it now. Can you ring up Mum and Dad and tell them that that I'm okay?" And he goes, "Oh, okay." He says, "I'll do that." And then the next minute I'm thinking, well, what about the rest of the crew? So, and in those days, the CYC didn't actually have a list of the names of the people who were on the crew, only that initial list that's in the book, and it's not necessarily accurate. I think they knew how many people were on the boat, but not who was on it. But I had a list on my computer at home. I said, "You've got to go into the computer and you've got to ring up all these people and tell them that we're okay." But we also had Gary, is it okay? The helicopter, ABC helicopter man. He used to come past our boat every day because we had an ABC, a Channel 10 reporter and video on our boat. So he videoed all the footage. Most of the footage from the 98 Hobart actually comes from our boat. And we had to beam it up. So, yeah, it was, yeah, we took it in our stride. It was a few people seasick. But everyone worked on it quite well, so yeah.
Wow. Scary, I guess. Like you said, you just kind of take it in stride and get through it.
Yeah. I had a mark the other day that was actually not lit. Jackie probably knows this one too. It wasn't lit and we couldn't find it, but I sort of was trying to navigate through those AIS positions again, because you can actually see the boat go around it and you can sort of guess where the mark is.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
good. Julie, we've had a question from the audience. So,
yeah.
He said there's a known 4-deckies union. Is there a navigators union? And what are some of the kind of key points for other crew members to kind of think about in regards to navigators? Like, sleep patterns or, you know, kind of preparation or things like that. If you're another crew member, what can you do to make the navigator's life easier?
A crew member, or a lot of navigators work with other navigators. I was going to bring that up later on, as like the mentoring system is really good. We used to have a formal navigators group at Middle Harbour Yacht Club, and then Frank Walker and I, when expedition first started coming in, we taught the basics of expedition. Nothing like the experts have, but it's just the basics. I know RPA have a navigators group that meets when necessary. So there's not a union as such, but you know, you need to get into some kind of network.
Okay, great. Like, as
Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it was kind of a two-part question. So the second part of that was, if you're not the navigator on board, but you're, you know, one of the other crew members on an ocean race, what types of considerations should you have for the navigator, so that, you know, you're making sure you're, as the non-navigator, helping them out as much as you can? Navigators either get a lot of sleep or they don't get any sleep. so I think basically, you know, we're mainly in a floating watch. I've been on races where I've nearly slept the whole race because there's nothing much to it. It's just straight ahead. Okay, keep going, straight ahead. I believe in training other crew members on how to use it, because if I go overboard, I want someone to be able to find me. I think it's actually quite useful, and I'm quite happy. You can use the computer, I say, you know, you can't really muck anything up as long as I've got the marks that I want locked. I don't want you to unlock them, but you can go and have a look at it anytime. But yeah, so okay, nice.
That's helpful.
And what are kind of your top 3 tips to somebody who's maybe listening to this and thinks, I want to learn to be a navigator? What are the 3 things you would suggest they go and do first? Okay, well, you need to do a coastal navigation course, a proper one, and get qualified. And in fact, I can't work out why, I hate to mention this, but I can't work out why the authorities don't make navigators have that coastal. You know, you have to have your radio operator's license, but you don't actually have to have coastal navigation. I find it very difficult these days with the self-proclaimed navigators who get a copy of the nav system on iPads or iPhones, and they think that they're real navigators, and then you say, oh yeah, you've got to sail this course. I go, well, is that course true or magnetic? Because that system on their iPad actually only uses true. It doesn't use magnetic, and the boat, of course, uses magnetic, so it's often 10 degrees out or 12 degrees out here. So that can be a bit of a worry. You need to understand the basics of navigation, and a lot of people who use these apps don't understand it. So that's one. If you want to be a navigator, it's really expensive and it's time consuming. Most navigators actually have their own computers with their systems on it, generally Expedition. Expedition's a few $1,000s, the computer's a few $1,000s. Then you've got to buy the charts, and then you've got to subscribe to things like Tide Tech and Predict Wind, etc., and set it all up. So I've tried to teach people that don't have a computer at home. Basically, you do like a morning's course with them, and then they've completely lost it because you need to have it to practice. So unless you've got an owner that wants to give you his computer and systems, etc., it's very hard. So if you're really serious about being a navigator or starting off navigating, you need to start buying the systems. That's the second thing. And then the third thing is try to form some sort of mentorship, which is what that question came up with other navigators. And, you know, and I've had some great, I remember some people might know Sighting Hammond. He was a very famous Middle Harbour Hobart race, sailed
won Admiral's Cups and everything. Deborah, you should know who Sadie Cameron is. Anyway, he's a bit old-fashioned, but Sadie and I used to have afternoon tea, and he used to bring out all these charts and things that he did in the Cows Week and show me how he navigated, and it was really fascinating because, you know, Expedition produces these predicted plots, whereas Sadie Hammond used to do it manually the whole way. It just must have used to take hours.
Wow.
But, you know, Adrian Callahan helped me when I first had to navigate in Cows Week, because, you know, you've got the dreaded tides down there, and so she showed me what she used, like the instruments to predict the tides, and some tips on how to get to that mark. Because if you've got to stick to the shore if the tide's against you, and then zoom across at the shortest distance. But sometimes you have to go way past the mark before you can zoom across, because if you just miss it, you're out the back door.
Yeah, it's
So,
interesting. It's something that in Australia we don't. Of course, we have tides, but not nearly to the same level that they have.
yeah. Yeah, so the tide's not important, but over there it is. And so I wasn't confident, and so spent like an afternoon with Adrian. She was really great. But Frank Walker and Brian Northcott was also, you know, part of my close group. And if you have a problem, you need to be able to discuss it with someone. So, and RPA has got an excellent group, so we should start it up here again. And I'm quite happy to run things.
Yeah, no, that's really great.
Yeah, because we got a few new ocean going boats at Middle Harbour. So
yeah. Exactly. And being able to learn from, as much as you can read books to do different things, being able to pull that kind of knowledge and experience from somebody is just invaluable. So
yeah.
And so, Julie, what kind of advancements do you see happening in the area of navigation in the next, say, 5 to 10 years? Do you think there's going to be a lot of kind of changes to the way we do things now?
One of the good things has happened recently. We now get the government vector charts, which is like a seamless chart. They're going to replace the CMAP. They're the official charts. I haven't downloaded them yet, but we're going to use them when we do the Sydney to Auckland race. So that's really good because the official charts and CMAP sometimes and other charting, it's not just CMAPs I think is really good, so I'm not knocking them, but other charts you say, up in the King's Cup, and I said, that island's not supposed to be there. There was an island, and on my chart there was no island. So you know, go whoops. So there is, but you know, I think these new charts should be exactly the same as the government, you know, the official chart. So that's really good. I think weather will become more and more accurate. You can see it now. You know, they tell you, you know, this East Coast low is going. On Sunday, I was out gardening and I came in and I said to Google, when is it going to rain? They said 4 o'clock. You know, Google box, this is Google. And I said to my next door neighbour, it's going to rain at 4 o'clock. She says, oh yeah. Sure enough, it started sprinkling at 5 to 4, and at 4 o'clock it rained. So they are becoming more and more accurate. So I think that's going to be one of the big advances. But the satellite phones, I mean, we're all going to be wandering around with satellite phones, I think, in the future. So they're going to be cheaper and faster and easier to use, and that'll allow everyone to get sort of weather downloads and being able to see, you know, all the AIS, where all the boats are, all the YB information. You know, if we can get better satellite communication, especially in the southern hemisphere, because it's better in the northern hemisphere, that would be good. I got one down here. It's like, we should be able to, instead of having skeds, we might have Zoom meetings.
Yeah. Yeah, it might even work better, who knows?
So you'll see all the navigators on Zoom when we got our satellite phones, and then we can all talk to someone. So, you know, they say, is HF going to disappear? And I know this year for the Hobart, it wasn't mandatory, like it was the other years, but all the time, I mean. But, you know, when we had that 98 Hobart, it was very useful for everyone to be on the same frequency and listening to what was happening. You know, you need something to replace that. I don't know what, but that's in Australia, not overseas where you're close to the coast most of the time.
Yeah, I guess that's, as you said, kind of mobile phones, sat phones don't really replace that kind of connectivity. Yeah. Everyone being able to listen in.
Yeah. So the satellite phone will be the big advancement in navigation.
So more like easier and cheaper kind of access to information and better information.
Yeah.
And Julie, you've mentioned a couple of the races that you have coming up for yourself. Tell us a little bit more about, you know, what's next for you, assuming that these lockdowns that have been lifted stay lifted and we can get back out.
Yep, I answered that, but I actually had one more. I had my little notes.
Yeah,
I think in the future, we're going to have virtual marks and virtual finishing lines. Now, I know at Middle Harbour Yacht Club, we tried the virtual marks, but I think everyone was navigating with that Navionics iPhone. And therefore, they were using true, not magnetic, or not everyone, because people were going around different marks. It was a big argument, so it didn't really work there. But in the Rajamuda now, at the end of every long race, they actually had a virtual finishing line. And the finisher was sitting in the bar with a cigarette in one hand and drink in the other hand and just watching the data come in. And I said to him, how do you do that? Because it uses that YB tracking, you know, and if anyone uses YB tracking, say on the Hobart race or just watching it on the screen, you know, it updates every 15 minutes or something, and different boats are updated at different times. You see one boat. And I said, well, so how do you do that, the finishing line? Well, this YB tracking thing can actually, when the boat's approaching the finishing line, I think it's 5 minutes before the finishing line, they send images back and forwards every, I don't know, second or half second or something, really, really fast. So we still had to take our times, but instead of the finishing crew being out there all night, because these races, you know, which generally finish like between 11 o'clock and at night and, I know, 10 o'clock the next morning. So instead of the whole finishing crew being out there, this YB tracking just finishes it and then interfaces it to the finishing software and gives you the results instantly.
That's interesting. So it knows when it's getting close, and then it says, okay, I'm getting close. I need to actually
go faster.
Yeah, update all the time.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's really cool. And talking about the virtual marks, as you said, has been, you know, I know contentious in some places. You as a navigator, I mean, are you for virtual marks, against virtual marks, and different? What do you think?
I really believe that in virtual marks. I mean, if some of the races that you can't run here because it's too deep to put a mark out there, or they drift, or, you know, it blows too hard to put it in. So if everyone had the proper navigation system where they were clocking it properly, because on here in Expedition you can get your track the whole time. I know you can on the Navionics as well, but it's more accurate with the magnetic side of it. Is that you just have to produce that, and we know where the finishing line is. I remember when Peter Sorensen used to be the skipper, because he owned the boat with me, or the two boats with me, and he'd be yelling, "Where's the mark, Julie? Where's the mark?" Oh, well, it's about 5-6 miles. You can't see it yet, Pete. And he says, "But I can see it. You can come downstairs and have a look at it if you want to." No, I want to see the mark now. Well, we can see it. Yeah. You know, it's the same thing with pinging the starts. You know, they go up there pinging the starts, and on Ray Roberts' boats, you know, we were going about 20 knots downwind at the start and hit the start dead on. I mean, it's extremely accurate. So there's nothing wrong with these virtual marks. They've just got to figure out, or the skippers have to figure out how they're going to comply with the virtual mark. And, maybe that YB tracking, maybe they become cheaper and everyone has to have a YB tracking on their boat all the time, and then you can see it.
Interesting. And do you think if you're going to run an event with virtual marks that people all need to use the same navigation equipment to make sure that's fair, or should it not really matter?
No, it shouldn't matter. No, it shouldn't matter. But yeah, we have our sailing manager who was trying to measure the distance of the courses using that same software, and he's saying, "No, Julie, you're wrong. You've got all the," because I plot all our courses in Expedition and then just give the distances of David. And I said, "I bet you did it with Navionics." It's like, because Navionics seems to actually try to move it a bit, I think, where the shallow bits are, or where it thinks the shallow bits are. So I don't know, for some reason I don't find it that accurate. But then I'm not an expert on it, but I have used it, and I'm not a fan of the iPhone or the iPad, because often you have to take people, they sit up there, they're the experts, they got their iPad, and they're saying, "Oh, it's shallow water to the starboard," and you go, "Turn your iPad upside down." I get it the wrong way around. It's like the old street directory.
Yeah.
That's what I mean, learning about the basics of navigation.
And some of the systems aren't going to be exactly on, are they? And when you get the more expensive systems, then they're going to be more accurate than the other ones.
Well, no, with GPS, like if your plotter that you've got on the boat, I mean, they're not all that expensive any now. You can just put it in there and just read it from there. No, it doesn't have to be. It's the GPS accuracy. And the iPhone should be accurate as well. I mean, that'd be pretty accurate, I'd say. I don't know why. I think it's the direction that they were getting.
Yeah. Okay. So watch this space. Virtual marks may be a thing.
Yes. So what am I going to do in the future? Well, I'm going to sail this year on a boat called Popeye with Craig Douglas. It's a Beneteau 47.7. I sailed it in Asia as well. In fact, I sailed it from Thailand to the Andaman Islands. So we're on with the previous owner. But it's a great little boat and lots of mates on it. And we're going to start on the breakout regatta, run by all the clubs going to Pittwater, Newcastle and Port Stephens. We've got a grand apartment to stay because we're supposed to be in Europe now doing the Canal du Midi trip. So we're treating ourselves to a penthouse apartment in Nelson Bay. And then next year, starting this year, I suppose, we're going to do all the Blue Water series, and then Sydney to Hobart, and then off to Pittwater to Auckland race.
Wow.
And
So
afterwards, I'm going to go cruising with Craig and some of the other crew up through the Pacific Islands, hopefully, before I get too old.
Yeah, well, hopefully, gosh, fingers crossed that things are all open by then. But it sounds like you've got an exciting and busy year ahead, and a couple of years ahead, 2021.
Yeah.
Oh, well, Julie, look, thank you so much for joining us tonight. This has been really amazing, and for sharing all of your charts and your photos of your kind of early days sailing. Thanks again to our audience for joining us for another week of Dockside with Deb. And we're getting back out on the water a bit now, but for those who can't, then it's still really great to be able to catch up with people like Julie in the meantime and learn lots of great things like navigation. So no, it's been amazing. Thank you again, Julie.
Thank you very much, Deb.
Thanks, guys. We'll see you next time. Thanks everyone for tuning in. If you'd like to know more about this program or the MySail app and community, head on over to mysail.team. That's mysail.team. Until next time, stay safe and happy sailing.